Here we are in December, a time of festivity and celebration, and also finally a time when there's no new Magic product coming out. So today, instead of doing a deck tech on something brand new, I want to talk to you about a deck I've been building over the course of this year. The commander is Rasputin Dreamweaver. He was one of the original legendary creatures from Legends in 1994, making him almost as old as I am. Now you may never have seen a Rasputin deck before, since he is on the reserve list and quite expensive now. So first up, I should explain what he does. And no, reading the card is not going to help us in this case, since it has a massive wall of text that is not actually clear on how anything works. So instead, let's look at the Oracle text. Rasputin Dreamweaver is a human wizard that costs 4, a white and a blue, with power and toughness 4/1. Rasputin enters the battlefield with 7 dream counters. You can remove a dream counter to add a colourless mana, or prevent 1 damage to Rasputin. In your upkeep, if Rasputin was untapped at the start of your turn, he gains another dream counter. However, he can never have more than 7 dream counters on him. He basically acts like a giant mana rock, costing 6 to cast but generating up to 7 mana once he enters the battlefield. Therefore, Rasputin decks generally have a lot of big colourless spells like Eldrazi and artifacts, and use blink effects to generate large amount of colourless mana by bringing him in and out of the battlefield. With cards like Eldrazi Displacer and Deadeye Navigator, Rasputin can easily produce an infinite amount of colourless mana. But for me, that's boring. I have an Eldrazi deck already, I don't want another one. What else would work with Rasputin? Well, how about building an old deck for an old card, making the deck completely Old Border. That means we can only use cards that were printed before 8th edition in 2003, with a few exceptions being the promo cards that were printed in Old Border, and the time-shifted cards from Time Spiral. This takes the deck from being an obvious infinite combo deck to a more complex build, with a bunch more obscure cards. However, it is still going to be combo focused, as in blue-white and all cards, you can't really win through combat damage, not against modern decks. This deck also isn't built to any sort of budget and will contain expensive and reserveless cards. I however will not be including anything that's ultra expensive, such as original duels or something like Time Twister. We're trying to keep things reasonably budgeted, but not building towards anything in particular. Let's get into this deck and talk about the ramp and removal before we get into the specific cards around our combos. For ramp, we have Soul Ring, Felwar Stone, Marble Diamond, Sky Diamond, Mindstone, Star Compass, Seashell Cameo, Soul Grail, Horn Power Stone, Copy Artifact, and Oath of Lieges. As you'd expect for these colours, our ramp is mainly artifact based, with only Seashell, Cameo, and Soul Grail as the unusual artifact options. Copy Artifact is a bit of a pricey card, however the ability to copy someone else's Soul Ring, or other artifacts as well, is really powerful. Lastly, Oath of Lieges is an interesting inclusion as it not only ramps us but also our opponents, but since we have bounce and sack lands, we should generally have the least amount of land at the table and always be ramping from it. I think it's a solid include, but feel free to run something else if you don't want to ramp your opponents as well. Onto the removal then, we have Wrath of God, Rout, Winds of Wrath and Akroma's Vengeance as our board wipes, and Swords to Plowshares, Afterlife, Aura of Silence, Dismantling Blow, Steel Enchantment, Arcane Denial, and Foil for our targeted removal. We have basically every good board wipe available, and then a mix of removal and counterspells to deal with specific threats. Dismantling Blow is slightly overcosted compared to a Disenchant for example, but the ability to draw cards with its kicker effect is really useful. Steel Enchantment is also a bit strange, but the only thing better than removing an enchantment is taking it under your control, so it's a cool piece of alternate removal. On that topic, as you can tell from our ramp and removal, we have several ways to steal and copy things for our opponents. Since we're stuck in Old Border, the ability to steal modern cards is very useful for powering up our deck a bit. As mentioned before, we have a Copy Artifact and Steel Enchantment, along with Bribery and Blatant Thievery to grab stuff. There is also a Clone and a Vesuvan Doppelganger to copy other creatures on the battlefield. I didn't want to dive too deep into the theft and copy mechanics for this deck, since that can be a bit awful to play against, but a few of these effects are great for dealing with threats and for grabbing more powerful creatures that we don't have access to in Old Border. Let's talk about how this deck is actually trying to win. I'm going to take on a bit of a journey through the many combos that I looked at for this deck, and why I ended up going with the one I did. Unlike Modern Magic, there are no 2-card combos with Rasputin. We don't have an Eldrazi Displacer or such that can just flicker him in and out of the battlefield. So I had to try out several other combos to use. First up, I tried some sacrifice loops with things like Karmic Guide, Wormfang Drake, and Altars, or Iridescent Drake and False Demise and Altars, and even looking at things like Peregrine Drake, which can untap lands, and using Enduring Removal to bounce it to the hand when it's sacrificed. These were okay, but Graveyard Loops were better in colours like black, and the Alders are massive red flags for other players, so they never stayed on the board long enough to be particularly useful. These sacrifice loops also didn't provide a lot of utility outside of the actual combo, which meant the cards stayed in my hand most of the time because I didn't want to play them out and lose them. But we're in blue-white, so there should be loads of other combos we can look at, right? I then experimented using Mind Over Matter with things like Archivist, Talos Researcher, and Arcanist the Omnipotent, which did work, but we're better in a specific Arcanist deck where we could untap and tap things a lot more instead of being forced into this Rasputin deck. After this, I decided to focus my attention back to Rasputin. He's the commander of the deck. I want to be playing him for more than just the colours. I want him to be part of the way I win. So I had to look for ways to generate infinite mana with just Old Border cards. First thing I looked at was a way to repeatedly exile and return to the battlefield, much like we do with the modern cards. The first way I found was by using Cold Storage, Treasure Hunter, Rasputin, and then either Great Whale or Palinchron, which, if you put everything under the Cold Storage, then sack the Cold Storage, will generate enough mana to replay the storage and continue the loop generating mana. But this was a janky 4-card combo and was just simply too complicated to pull off. The pieces also didn't do a lot by themselves again, which meant I was holding them in hand. I then looked into Talos' Coffin, but again, too many pieces to make it work. So if I couldn't exile Rasputin, how about bouncing him to hand? And finally I had a good breakthrough. The enchantment Equilibrium allows you to pay 1 colourless mana whenever you cast a creature to bounce another creature to its owner's hand. Since Rasputin can generate 7 mana, he can effectively pay for himself by casting and bouncing him, though at the loss of coloured mana. But if I pair him up with creatures that untap lands when they enter, I can make up that shortfall of coloured mana. Cards like Peregrine Drake and Palinchron can generate their own mana when they enter the battlefield by untapping lands. However, they tend to only generate enough mana for their original cost. I need +1 to make them break even. And then to go mana positive, we need to make another mana on top of that. So in order to make this combo work, we need at least 2 lands that can tap for 2 mana, along with enough coloured sources to replay both the creatures. Luckily, in Old Border, this is not that difficult. Here's a quick rundown of how this works. We have Rasputin and Equilibrium out on the field, and enough mana to cast our other creature and bounce Rasputin. In this case, a Great Whale. We play the Whale, paying an extra 1 to bounce Rasputin to our hand, untapping all our lands, notably a Karoo and a Temple of the False Gods, which generate 2 mana each when they're tapped. We can then tap all our lands again to make 9 mana, 6 of which is spent to cast Rasputin again. The 7th mana is then spent to bounce Great Whale back to our hand. Rasputin then enters, giving us 7 more colourless mana, which we can then replay the Great Whale. We spend the 8th mana we generated to bounce Rasputin back to our hand, and then the 9th mana, which was generated when Great Whale first entered, is left over and can be stored to generate infinite mana. Each time we do this loop, we're therefore generating 1 extra mana, either a blue, a white, or a colourless, depending what we spend casting our creatures. The combo does also work with Cloud of Fairies, which only untaps 2 land. However, it only works if one of the land is Lotus Veil, since all our other lands that tap for 2 mana tap an extra colourless, leaving you short on either a blue or a white mana. Now, this might sound a bit complicated to actually do in a game. There's a lot of moving pieces, and it's a 3-card combo minimum. You always have Rasputin, since he's your commander, and people generally leave him alone once he's on the field. You can use Peregrine Drake, Palinchron, Great Whale, or Cloud of Fairies as the second creature, and we've got several lands that can tap for 2 mana. Rasputin and all the untappers also give a bunch of mana when you play them out, so it's actually not hard to play them all out in a single turn because they're just generating the mana as you're playing them. And because we already have a Palinchron in the deck, it would also be silly not to run the famous Palinchron High Tide combo as a second way to generate infinite mana. This gives us a combo to generate infinite mana, but what do we do with that infinite mana? Well, we have a Whetstone to mill out our opponents, a Decree of Justice to make a massive army of angels, a Stroke of Genius or a Brain Geyser to draw out our entire library, or a Prosperity to make everyone draw out their library. Brain Geyser and Stroke of Genius can also be used on our opponents to force them to draw out their entire library and lose to an empty library. For times when we don't have our combo pieces around, Rasputin also just provides a large amount of mana. Therefore, we have several other big spells to use with it. Blatant Thievery to steal a bunch of cards from our opponents, Time Stretch to get some extra turns, Radiant Archangel, a flying beater, and a Chroma, Angel of Wrath for a really big flying beater. Since we're playing a combo deck, we also want to be able to find the pieces we need, and for that we have several tutors, including Enlightened Tutor, Mystic Tutor, Long-Term Plans, Merchant Scroll, and Weathered Wayfarer. Enlightened Tutor can find our enchantment Equilibrium, Mystic Tutor can find most of our big payoff cards, Long-Term Plans can get anything at the cost of being a few cards deep in our library, Merchant Scroll can find our other tutors, or something like Stroke of Genius, and Weathered Wayfarer can be used to fetch the lands we need. Along with the tutors, we then have several draw effects to help us dig further into our library and find the tutors and combo pieces. As mentioned before, we have a Brain Geyser and Stroke of Genius, which are great to use with Rasputin with all his colourless mana. But then we also have a Concentrate, a Fact or Fiction, a Mystic Remora, and a Ristic Study. Lastly, we have a Library of Lang to prevent having to discard our hand at end of turn if we're drawing lots of cards. Since we have some critical combo pieces in this deck, we also need ways to recur them if they end up in the graveyard. This includes Relearn to get back instants and sorceries, Recall to trade cards out from our hand to get anything back, a Karmic Guide to get back creatures, and an Auramancer to specifically get back enchantments. The creature count for this deck is quite low at only 15 creatures. Therefore, we need ways to prevent our opponents from hitting us with combat damage, while we're busy looking for our combo pieces and drawing cards. For that, we have Glacial Chasm, which can prevent damage for a few turns, Core Haven, which can stop a single creature, Propaganda and Woodborn Muse to make attacking us less profitable, Peacekeeper to prevent all combat, Fogbank to act as a blocker, and Mother of Runes to make interaction harder. With a combination of these out, we can make ourselves really annoying to swing into, buying us extra turns to build up mana and cards. Lastly, let's go over the land base for the deck, because again, it's a bit weird from a normal deck. For dual lands, we only have Adakar Waste, Coastal Tower, and Skycloud Expanse. Sadly, in Old Border, dual lands weren't really that big of a thing yet, so we don't get much choice for what to include. The only one really we don't have here is Tundra, because it's way outside the price range of what I'm trying to do here. We've got a couple of fetch lands, including Flooded Strand, Floodplain, and Terminal Moraine. But these can only fetch us basics. Good for fixing, but can't get our untyped dual lands. For our lands that produce multiple mana, we have Coral Atoll, Karoo, Soldevi Excavations, Temple of the False God, and Lotus Field. I considered running a Scorched Ruin, but I felt it was too risky to play since it puts us down a lot of lands, and we really need lands that produce colourless mana anyway. In the utility lands, we have a Riptide Laboratory, so that we can bounce Rasputin to hand, since he's a wizard, along with 14 islands and 7 plains to round out the deck. And that's the deck. It's definitely been a journey for me building this over the course of this year. I wouldn't count it as a particularly strong deck, but it certainly gets people's attention when I pull it out thanks to the unusual commander and theme. It's had some wins, and I've had a lot of fun playing it, and I hope it gives you some ideas on what you can do with decks like this. And the best thing is, no matter how many new products come out, I won't ever need to worry about updating it, since we're not likely to see any new cards in Old Border. Wait, what? Thanks for watching.